This launch of about 200 rockets and about 20 drones is certainly the largest we've seen, but it's comparable to some of the earlier attacks. And I think we're just not going to be able to know when the IDF tells us that this was a preemptive launch, that they had the capability to, or they were preparing to launch a far greater attack. Well, that's kind of the tricky part about preemptive attacks, is we can't know for certain whether or not that was actually going to be the case.
Now, the Israeli Defense Forces launched strikes inside Lebanon overnight, and Hezbollah carried out a large drone and rocket attack against Israel in what seems to be a major escalation of the conflict. The exchange of attacks follows the killing of Hezbollah commander in Beirut almost a month ago. Here with me is Zach Anders, who has been covering the Hezbollah conflict since October. Zach, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Zach, Israel has called this a preemptive strike. What information did Israel have in order to excuse a preemptive strike?
Well, they would certainly be monitoring, and they have been throughout the course of this conflict, any of the movement in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is operating with some pretty large equipment that can be seen with the balloons and the satellites, especially for some of these rocket launch positions. These posts are rather large. They've been fixed into position, and they can be remotely controlled. So when the IDF came out this afternoon and said, well, we destroyed thousands of rocket launch positions, that needs to be a bit more specific. That's rocket launch tubes, posts that are holding those rockets, but in reality, these were dozens of airstrikes. It wasn't like Israel with the 100 fighter jets they said they used this morning was carrying out over 1,000 airstrikes, but rather dozens of airstrikes on positions that likely destroyed thousands of rockets, because some of these rocket launch sites can contain in rows. Some of these rocket launch sites can contain 24 in a volley. So it's certainly a major moment. Do we call this an escalation? Well, Hezbollah has been firing across this border, averaging about 7 daily attacks for the last 10 months. And there have certainly been attacks near the same scale as what we saw this morning. There's been daily attacks where there's been over 100 rockets launched, and about 6 drones, I think was, as I was looking back through my notes, was the largest we had seen to date. So this launch of about 200 rockets and about 20 drones is certainly the largest we've seen, but it's comparable to some of the earlier attacks. And I think we're just not going to be able to know when the IDF tells us that this was a preemptive launch, that they had the capability to, or they were preparing to launch a far greater attack. Well, that's kind of the tricky part about preemptive attacks, is we can't know for certain whether or not that was actually going to be the case.
What have we heard, if anything, from Hezbollah, and is it likely that we're going to see counterattacks now?
Yeah, so Hezbollah just quoted in a Reuters source as saying that they believe that this is a first phase of the retribution of Fuad Shukur's death, the Hezbollah's number 2, back on July 31st, that they will still continue to attack northern Israel as their solidarity movement with Gaza. The Hezbollah source just telling Reuters, though, a few minutes ago, that the response to Fuad Shukur's killing was, quote, delayed by political considerations, chiefly Gaza truce talks. Hezbollah worked to make sure the response to Israel's killing of its top commander would not trigger a full-scale war. And this is what we've seen throughout the course of the last 10 months, is that Hezbollah has been provoking Israel, obviously, with these daily attacks, but they've confined these daily attacks roughly to the evacuation zone, about 5 miles from the border. They haven't attempted massive launches on Tel Aviv. Of course, the IDF is telling us this morning that that is why they preemptively struck Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, was that they were preparing for a large-scale attack, and that on that target list was positions either in or near Tel Aviv.
Zach, what does this second front, if you like, for Israel mean for the rest of the situation in that area, which is the peace talks with Gaza? Does what's happening with Hezbollah affect the outcome of the Israel-Gaza conflict?
Well, from what I'm hearing, I think that the mind is already made up within the Netanyahu administration and the IDF that there will be a shift of attention, and they've called it that. Defense Minister Gallant last week said, we are going to shift our focus from the south in Gaza to the north in Hezbollah. 10 months, there's over 60,000 Israelis in northern Israel who have been fully evacuated. They're receiving state assistance to live in hotels elsewhere in the country. That is going to change at some point. Now, Hezbollah and obviously their dominance in southern Lebanon is walking a political tightrope within the Lebanese diaspora because the mechanism and the structure for a diplomatic solution is there. It already exists. UN Resolution 1701, if it's something they've already agreed to after the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war. If Hezbollah retreats above the Litani River and creates that buffer zone that's supposed to be just Lebanese armed forces and the United Nations peacekeeping force, that again, this is a structure that's supposed to be in place, was agreed to back in '06. If they can agree to that political decision, everybody back to their corners, and this goes away potentially. Israel's not looking at it from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing on the ground. Israel does not look at the equation that way, that even if Hezbollah and somebody can twist their arm and get them to agree to 1701, that they're still going to create a forceful solution to disarm Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and reduce the number of these rocket launch sites and some of these drone manufacturing facilities, the things that have been creating casualties and inflicting losses in northern Israel. Israel's just not going to have it. They're going to go in when they're ready and when they're capable, because most of their forces still tied up in Gaza. They're going to make some sort of move. Is everything that we've been told by our defense sources is that it will happen eventually. But of course, the U.S. is sitting here on the sidelines trying everything they can to prevent that from happening and trying to find some sort of diplomatic solution. But right now, I mean, moments like this morning just proves that we're very far away from that.
Zach, thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate it.